Hi, everybody. I'm Evan Smith, the CEO of the Texas Tribune. Welcome to the 2022 Texas Tribune Festival. So nice to be back in person. And to this conversation with Laura Arnold, the Houston-based philanthropist and public citizen, and one of the wealthiest Texans and Americans. Laura and her husband, John, are among the most prolific givers in the country, ranked in the top 25 by Forbes, and on the younger end of that upper group. Since 2011, the Arnolds have committed more than $1.4 billion to addressing needs, opportunities, and challenges in 4 issue areas that interest them: criminal justice, health, education, and public finance. In addition, the Arnolds have been concerned for some time about the phenomenon of news deserts in and out of Texas. They know, as we all do, that the absence of reliable, credible, independent sources of news is a threat to democracy. In 2021, the Arnolds were once again among the largest supporters of public service journalism in the United States, funding nonprofits from California to Vermont to the tune of more than $8.4 million. Full disclosure, one of the biggest recipients of their largesse has been the Texas Tribune. That will soon be eclipsed by the thing they have cooking in Houston, which we'll discuss. Born in Puerto Rico, Laura graduated from Harvard University, then got a master's degree at Cambridge and a law degree at Yale. After clerking for a judge on the D.C. Court of Appeals, she worked as a mergers and acquisitions lawyer for a New York firm, then was general counsel for a Houston energy company. Until 2012, she ran her family's foundation, the Laura and John Arnold Foundation, since renamed Arnold Ventures. I'm looking forward to talking to Laura about why she and John give, how they give, and what they mean to accomplish in an increasingly complex world. Please welcome Laura Arnold. Good to have you here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
It's exciting to get to sit across from you and talk about this stuff, because I think many of us are looking out at a world in which government is increasingly unable or unwilling to solve problems. And we're turning to family offices, institutional philanthropy, nonprofits generally, to step into that public space. So I want to start, though, back to, at the beginning, the origins of your foundation, your philanthropy, by whatever we call it, Laura and John Arnold Foundation, Arnold Ventures. It's now been 12 years. How is it going versus the expectations you had back at the beginning or before the beginning? Was it the way you planned it, totally different, or something in between?
Well, in terms of volume of work, it's going gangbusters. It's the Full Employment Act, this era of ours, in terms of things to do, in terms of problems to identify and solve, and honestly, also in terms of innovation and talent. I think that there is a silver lining of the moment that we're living, is that there's a lot of not only outrage, but there's a lot of energy and a lot of a heightened desire to right what people are perceiving as wrongs.
Yeah.
And I do think that among everything that you identify, there is a cloud of optimism that things can be better, that our systems are broken, our democratic system is broken. We can talk about that, but query whether the democratic system or the representative system really does reflect the will of the people, or whether it reflects some sort of dysfunction that's causing us to not achieve what the populace wants us to achieve.
Well, in fact, the session before this, we had the Speaker of the Texas House, very nice guy, Republican speaker, been in the leadership role for one session, likely to be there again. And we talked about 3 issues since you brought this up: Medicaid expansion, marijuana reform, and gambling. And the people of the state are pretty clear on what they think, but the leaders of the state think something else. And it is a case of a disconnect of the sort that you just described. If we put this to the voters, they may vote differently than the legislature votes.
That's right. And you mentioned and I appreciate you mentioning our large areas of work. One area that you didn't mention precisely, although you mentioned journalism, is democracy.
Right.
And we have always been interested in reforming our democratic systems, but today especially, it's particularly relevant because we're seeing more and more examples of the fact that people who are getting elected are not reflective of the desires and of the values and of the of the wishes of the people that they represent. Right. And that's because of our failed primary system. It's due to sort of inherent failures in our democracy that we believe, and I think many of us believe, that we can fix.
So you've just actually teed up a good question here, which is, do you solve the problem by going at democracy from the policy angle or from the politics angle? Because if we're electing the wrong people, all the policy work you do is not going to solve that. Or if the mechanism for electing people is the wrong mechanism. You know, I had a question yesterday at a session we did about ranked choice voting, or about a so-called jungle primary, top two finishers, that maybe that is more likely to bring a solutions-oriented answer at election time than the way we have it now.
Well, not maybe, absolutely.
Yeah.
I believe.
Yeah.
And I think the data that we have shows that, we very proudly supported the ranked choice voting victories in Maine and Alaska. That is a concept, that's one example. You mentioned open primaries also, but these are concepts that are transforming the way, the incentive structure for politicians to speak to people.
Yeah.
If you know that you don't only have to win in your very small partisan primary, in which, in Texas, 6% of the population
6% is sometimes a good year. A good year.
Right. This year so far, maybe in the low teens historically in terms of representation in primary. So that means that a tiny, tiny, tiny sliver of individuals is choosing the people who are going to Congress and who are representing us, because in 95%, I think is the statistic, and over 90% of the districts in this country, races aren't competitive, which means if you win your primary, you won your election.
Right.
So ranked choice voting, open primaries, this idea of telling candidates, there is one primary. You have to convince every single individual in the center, not just people who are likely to show up in primaries who we know are more partisan than the population. I mean, I think that does change the conversation.
Right.
We also, of course, as you know, we also would pair that with ranked choice voting, which is a system that, again, all of these efforts are trying to draw the conversation toward the middle, or trying to draw representation, to what we believe is a more accurate reflection of what
So, of
people
course,
want.
I come back, Laura, to where the system creates this result that you just described, where what I think of as the burnt ends of the brisket on either side ultimately are in charge, because primaries bring out those people. And if you have profoundly non-competitive elections, the primary is the general, right?
That's right.
It's in the interest of people in power to leave that system in place, because it's effectively an incumbency protection program, right?
Absolutely.
Right. So how do you persuade people to act against their self-interest in office once in office?
Well, I think it's very hard. That is the question. And that is why strategically, in this particular area, the focus is ballot initiatives, right? Let the citizens decide to overturn that system. And that's true of gerrymandering, and that's true of any, no entrenched interest, not just in this area, but, in any policy area that we all work on. No entrenched interest wants to give up their control. Right. So it's always everything that we do in democracy, in healthcare, in criminal justice, in education, is battling against established interests that have something significant to lose, whether it's political power or economic interest or, government contracts, whatever else. That's always the battle.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I want to know why the other areas that you invest in, the ones I called out, are the ones that you have gravitated toward over time. Because surely, as you say, there's a lot more work to be done than there is time to do it, or even if you're fortunate enough to have money to spend on it, money to do it. Why those four? Why pick any one of them if you want, as opposed to any others?
When we started this journey, and I realized I didn't answer your initial question, which was how's it going, but I'll tell you, when we started this journey, as you kindly mentioned, we were younger, and we thought this whole philanthropy thing was going to be very different. We thought that it would be much easier. We thought that there'd be established organizations that we could write large checks to, and sort of be passive about this. When we started digging and sort of started thinking through the issues, and maybe that was really sort of a reflection of youth optimism and, a Pollyannish view of how to save the world, we should have known that if some of these really entrenched systemic failures were easy to solve, somebody else would have solved them, right? I mean, these things are hard to solve because they're hard, because human nature is difficult, because human behavior is hard to change, because entrenched interests dominate many conversations. So it's not as easy as anybody would have anticipated. Yeah. So we started thinking about what we valued as an organization when we became an organization. What was it that was our value add, given our age, given our the fact that we don't have financial interests, active financial interests. So we were quote unquote retired, which actually does make a very big difference when you're a philanthropist, because you don't have a business to protect, you don't have a brand to protect.
You can just always do the right thing as you define it.
That's right, as you define it, which may, by the way, in all honesty, not be the right thing, but certainly you can act out of conviction without having to safeguard your brand or your private interests. And we think that's a market advantage. So to answer your question, we really decided to take on the hard questions, to take on systemic dysfunction, to take on issues that maybe others were not well positioned to take on. With a longer time horizon and with a focus on data, because those were our values. Our values were follow the data, find the systemic dysfunction, understand it, and be brave enough to ask the hard questions and go where the data leads you. So in that universe, it became clear to us that although we started in education, that really social justice and issues about opportunity and equality and social programs were really where we needed to gravitate. And that took us to a broader conversation about maximizing opportunity and minimizing injustice, and about, how do we narrow our focus to areas where we do think we can find data-centric solutions, where we do believe that non-ideological ideas and non-ideological policy plays could really make a difference. So healthcare is one of them. Like you said, criminal justice certainly is one of them.
Right. Of the four, it seems to be the two of them, education and healthcare, there are a lot of people swimming in the water with you. Criminal justice, maybe more today than at the beginning, and certainly public finance, fewer people. Those you seem to have taken on more as one of one as opposed to one of many.
I think that's right. I think one of our investment criteria has always been trying to identify that bipartisan policy window, whether it exists today or whether it's likely to exist in the future. But identifying those areas where we believe that we can find non-ideological solutions that would be longer lasting. We're not interested in pushing a solution in a Republican controlled legislature if it's fiscal policy, or in a democratically controlled country if it's entirely blue, because we believe that those aren't long lasting. We want to create consensus around issues, even if the compromise solution isn't necessarily exactly what we would want. We believe that bipartisan collaboration is important.
Do you think governing from the center or creating policy choices from the center is, practically speaking, possible in the country we're in right now?
It is absolutely possible at the state level.
At the state level. Even are you talking about this state?
I think even in this state. I mean, look, I'm looking at Mark Levin right now.
Yeah.
Who is a champion of criminal justice reform.
Right. I think it says exception who proves the rule on his business card, though, I'm afraid. Yeah.
I think we've seen, I hate to say even in Texas, but I think there are reasonable people everywhere. And I think there are reasonable people in every political party. And I think that much of the polarization that we're experiencing or hearing about is led by people who don't represent the true wishes of people in this room, of people in the state. So I do think that ruling from the center or governing from the center, policy making from the center is absolutely possible. I mean, we've done...
Your through line, Laura, at Arnold Ventures in everything you do is evidence-based. This is a really interesting phrase at this moment where people, not everybody and not the people here, but people out in the world think reality is a subjective construct. The concept of evidence is even up for litigation. So how do you do evidence-based when people can't even agree on what evidence is?
Look, it's a good question. I think that in some areas it's harder than others, but certainly, we try very hard to battle against those who use evidence, what's that saying, like a drunk uses a lamppost for support and not illumination. And you see a lot of that, right? And I mean, as a lawyer, that's my background, right? In legal training, you are trained to take data points and use them to support your argument and minimize the relevance of data points that may deflect from your argument. That's a very natural human tendency, and it's a professional talent in many of our professions. But I think that for us, having a debate about the evidence, I think even that is an advancement, right? If we can at least have, use evidence as a common denominator, I am happy to have an argument with you about whether or not my evidence is correct or your evidence is correct. But at least we're,
At least you're talking.
At least we're talking, and at least we're talking about facts.
Yeah.
We're not talking about, we're not demonizing somebody, or we're not using sort of, ideology to try to promote something.
Yeah.
If you were citing evidence to me, even if I disagree with your evidence, at least I know you care about facts. Yeah. And that's a step forward.
Do you see this as a common thread in many big philanthropic organizations, or is this unique to what you do? I'm thinking about the other foundations we've gotten to know over the years, many we all know out in the world that we might have a personal relationship with. I don't know for a fact that they're not doing that, but I also don't think of it as part of their brand necessarily.
I think that's right. I mean, I don't know that many people necessarily lead with evidence. I think people would be reluctant to ignore evidence if you put it in front of them. But I think that many philanthropists lead with the heart in some ways, which I don't think is wrong, because I think many issues that require the attention of philanthropy are issues that don't lend themselves necessarily to an evidence.
Well, they start as, in some cases, personal passions, right? This is something I care about. Now, we do hear a lot, even if we don't hear about evidence, we do hear a lot about impact. And so that leads, are those the same thing? Are evidence and impact necessarily the same thing?
I mean, look, in evidence, I think that one thing I always worry about, to be honest with you, is that if you overly rely on a randomized control trial, for example, which is the marquee, the gold standard for evidence, is that you might be measuring the wrong thing. So there's that, right? I mean, you could, if you care about, an education intervention and you're measuring ability to read in third grade, well, what if that person winds up, not getting a job later, or, having, some terrible life outcome that you didn't measure in your RCT. And ultimately, what you care about is, creating productive individuals in society and creating stable communities. And so there is always a concern that evidence might be too narrow a focus if you overly rely on one single data point or one single measure. So that's something that we very much consider. Yeah. But in terms of, impact, impact is a little squishier, right? Impact.
Those of us on the end of receiving grants like to hear people like you say impact is squishier. I feel like we've just been let off the hook, sort of.
Well, in your business, right? I mean, I don't know if should I have as a milestone in my grant how many clicks you get in the Texas Tribune website. I don't think that's a particularly impactful data point,
but there's a higher level impact that you're striving for. We agree on what the goal is. We agree on the values. And then you get to judge whether the work is being done in line with the goal and the values. And the fact is different people with the same goal and the same values may achieve it through different doors. And the trick is achieve it in your way.
That's right. And I mean, and in your example, if you're reporting, I can personally trace your reporting to policy impacts in many areas.
Right.
So I view that. Now, is that evidence? Is that impact? I'm not sure, but I do think it's an important conversation.
That's how you measure success. That's the kind of the question. So, who out in the world of philanthropy do you admire, other than you and John, in terms of how
we admire ourselves well?
What one hopes you do.
Some days,
yeah.
Yes.
But who is doing it right? I'm always interested to ask people in this space. Tell me who else in this space, because you all know your peer organizations. Who is doing it the right way?
Look, I think a lot of people are doing it the right way. I think we very much admire someone like Chuck Feeney from Atlantic Philanthropies, who committed to giving away his substantial fortune in his lifetime. I think that was a very bold thing. That's something that we aspire to do because we very deeply believe that philanthropists today should address today's problems. That is a controversial thing. Some people don't believe that. Some people, and I respect those who view philanthropy as an institution that should be lasting for time immemorial for societies, in a more long-lasting way. So I respect that is not our view, but I admire people who are more aggressive with their philanthropy. That is a very hard thing to do. As ironic as it sounds and as counterintuitive as it sounds, people are very reluctant to separate from their money, even if they have a lot of it. It's very, very strange. But I mean, I think people are very philanthropic in nature, in heart, but in practice, when you look at the dollars and cents that go out the door from their philanthropies, it's actually quite small. So somebody who is aggressive and actually intent on reducing the amount of the amount on their side of the ledger, I think is important. I think also, one group of philanthropists that I very much admire are people who are thinking much longer term. I think there's a lot to like about the effective altruism movement. I think there's a lot to like about considering big questions and considering large threats to society. And if you believe that as a philanthropist, you're in a position to take a step back and really think about these macro issues and contribute to a very long-term answer to what could be a very long-term problem, I admire that a lot.
Well, there are some people who nibble at the edges of an issue, and there are some people who devour the entire thing. I'm thinking about Mackenzie Scott's philanthropy. Over the last couple of years, we've noticed these massive investments, and they are really investments, on vertical issues. Mm-hmm. And you kind of almost can't get your mind around the size of the gift, and you wonder, are the people receiving it even going to be able to spend it? I mean, it's just so much. That hasn't necessarily been your approach. You've tended to do a little bit more of a step back, right?
Right. Well, so Mackenzie, whom I admire very, very much, is, as I understand it, focused on immediate impact and immediate help. I think
She's having an immediate impact.
But that's right. But I think but I think her view is that she is not in a position to assert a view as to how these organizations should do their work. So she writes a check and says, I trust you to execute however you wish. And a lot of it is about helping people today in a more tangible, immediate way. It's not so, when you work on policy as we do, the exercise is different. The exercise is longer term. The exercise is creating a solution, thinking through the solution, thinking through alternatives, doing the work to bring people along on both sides of the aisle, and creating coalitions and working the politics. So it's a very, very different exercise that in a way is removed from the day-to-day help, if you will, of people, but at the same time, we believe is longer lasting and more sustainable because it leads to a higher leverage point.
Right. Well, she's not funding projects; she's transforming organizations with gifts that size, and it's a vastly different approach.
No, that's right.
So let me ask you about another way in which philanthropy manifests itself, and this is I'm actually going to ask you about something that John has been more of an outspoken person on, although I suspect you have a point of view about this. John has been very vocal about the subject of how individuals give. Mm-hmm. How donor-advised funds end up being tax shelters more than vehicles for philanthropy. He wants time limits for giving. He suggested that there should be changes toward what counts toward the 5%. He wants expanded tax deductions as an incentive to do more and bigger giving.
Yeah.
Is this his passion or is it your shared passion? Do you agree that we need to rewrite the laws around the way money is given away?
Everything we do is our shared passion, and I do think that John absolutely
he's been very vocal about it on social media and other places.
For sure. Yes. Well, my husband loves Twitter, which is very interesting because if you knew him, if those of you who know him know he's a very quiet person, and somehow he's sort of transformed on Twitter, and he's very chatty on Twitter, which is very
chatty.
Good.
I agree.
But on I think this issue, like I said, we look at. We're always looking for issues of systemic dysfunction. We're always looking at, at areas where we think there's a market imbalance, where something doesn't work. And if you think about philanthropic giving in this country, there's a reason why the tax system exists the way it does. There's a reason why you get a charitable deduction when you give to a C3. And the reason, at least high level, is that you're supposed to be helping people. It's not that you take a charitable deduction today and park that money in a charitable gift fund and not ever do anything with it.
Unlimited amount of time and just
an unlimited amount because the charitable gift fund qualifies as that C3. So there's something inherently unfair to society about taking money away from government coffers, which is what you're doing when you take a charitable deduction, and not giving anything back. And if you think about the fact that there's over $1 trillion in these charitable gift funds doing nothing for anybody, when there are people who are struggling economically, who are in conditions of dire poverty in this country, where there are systemic problems that need help today, that doesn't seem okay to us. So we started thinking about how would we reform this system? What are the incentive structures that cause this dysfunction to exist? And that was the impetus behind the ACE Act, which we've introduced, not we, but which legislatures have introduced in Congress to try to get at this, to try to incentivize charitable gift funds to actually give to operating charities. Or at least don't take the tax deduction, right? Do one or the other. If you want to give the money today, great, give the money today and give it to an operating charity. Or alternatively, if you want to take a little bit longer of a time period to help an operating charity, then don't take the tax deduction today. So it seems pretty straightforward to us.
How much, you touched on this a little bit, I want to understand again, philosophy of giving. How much of what you do is long-term plays and how much of it is situational? So take the pandemic. Mm-hmm. You had a period of 2.5 years or so in which there was an extraordinary amount of need created by this unprecedented public health or nearly unprecedented public health emergency. And a lot of organizations were coming with their hands out, understandably, because people were both anxious about the world. They couldn't understand what was happening, didn't know how long it was going to happen. The economy turned upside down. The economic fortunes of organizations trying to do good work in the world turned upside down. Vulnerable people became even more vulnerable. So how much of your philanthropy is focused on situations like that where you're essentially in the on-deck circle waiting to get up at bat? And how much of it is we have a longer-term goal, we're going to work backwards from that, and we're going to build a plan toward that?
It's always an unsatisfying answer to say both, but
well, I assume it is both because I've seen you do both.
No, that's right. Yeah. That's right. But it is also absolutely true that pandemics, as a sociologist once said, and I can't remember his name, pandemics fracture society along known fault lines. And we saw that. We saw that in COVID. Right. We saw that every issue that we worked on, whether it was prescription drug pricing or surprise billing or criminal justice or pretrial justice, democracy, everything got worse because of the pandemic. So for us, in terms of the long-term play of the issues that we care about, in terms of our policy objectives, we found that our message could actually be amplified by the experience of the pandemic. So take criminal justice, for example. That begged the question, the pandemic begged the question, well, jails are overcrowded. Why are these people here in the first place? Does everybody need to be here? From a safety perspective, we need to reduce the prison population, but actually, from a systemic perspective, they don't need to be here in the first place. So can we have a conversation about how we approach incarceration in this country? And we took advantage of those opportunities. And we also did a fair amount of work in what you'd call sort of immediate relief. We think very much about disaster recovery. Right. We thought very much about disaster recovery during, the hurricanes, and how do we as a society, as philanthropy, as government respond to crises, and how can we be better prepared to respond to future crises? So we do some of that work. We try to do it on a macro level, but obviously, we're citizens of a society, and we understand that emergencies also require people to step up and help, in ways that are very tangible and that are required that moment, like food and like, transportation, that kind of thing.
Right. Again, on the question of philosophy of philanthropy, how much of what you do you think is, I'm sure this thing is going to work, therefore I make a gift because I have confidence it's going to work, and how much are you willing to take a risk? In our business, in the media business, we see a lot of three downs and a punt. Like nobody wants to put the ball in the end zone because the cost of failure or the fear of failure is too great. Nobody wants to enable risk taking because they just don't. And I wonder in philanthropy how comfortable you are with courting risk.
Well, I think that's a real issue. That's a real issue for many philanthropists. I think that's an issue where I do believe we have a market advantage. We're not really well known. Like I said, we don't have a business. We don't necessarily have a commercial brand that we care about.
Right.
We want to be known as people who are trying things that we think are smart. And so I do believe we have a higher tolerance for failure, if you will. But it is a valid issue in philanthropy in general. And I think that people are approaching this very thoughtfully in terms of how do you eliminate that risk. So people like Chris Anderson at TED, who created the Audacious Project for that very reason, because people are reluctant to invest in the big idea because what if it fails and I look like a fool? So
Right.
can I create this environment where everybody is figuratively holding hands and jumping into the cold water together? That way, if it fails, well, I failed alongside of,
Right.
not so much Laura Arnold, but like, I don't know, I failed alongside of Larry Page or
Well, you're
or
giving
whoever
each
else.
other permission
So,
to
yes.
fail, right? By doing it together.
And clearly, I can't have been that stupid if 15 people who were successful invested in this too. So there's some of that. There is that herd mentality equivalent that is very important, and
Right.
people think very hard about how to break that so that people can be bolder in their giving.
Yeah. Laura, choices have consequences, not just practically, but optically. When you choose to give to an organization or you fund the people behind an idea, you are making a statement, whether you intend to make a statement or not. And there are inevitably judgments about who you stand for and what you stand behind. So how do you think about the politics and partisanship piece of this? Because again, we're in a very different world today than we were 12 years ago in terms of polarization, partisanship, and the assumption about your motives in everything that you do.
It is rough waters to navigate right now.
Yeah.
And I think in large part it's rough because for some reason it's very hard for people to believe that we truly are nonpartisan, but we truly are. We're not, or I wouldn't say, it's even beyond being nonpartisan. We're non-ideological. And we are, I think, hopefully not to a flaw, but we are very much intent on pursuing specific issues and partnering with whoever is willing to partner with us on that specific issue.
Yeah.
Even if the perception of our partners in the aggregate might be negative. And I do think that is a very hard thing to navigate, and especially in our times now. I mean, a specific example is the deeply, deeply disturbing abortion laws and abortion restrictions that are being passed nationwide. Well, they're being passed in some places that are also doing some great work in other areas.
And,
like criminal
so you're
justice.
spending money, just you cited that issue, you held the door open, I'm going to walk through it. So
Walk through it.
So you're spending money on that issue, for instance,
On abortion.
or on the issue of reproductive health or access
Yes.
to reproductive health care.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a very active contraceptive choice and access portfolio at Arnold Ventures,
Right.
which focuses on safeguarding the opportunity for women to access the contraceptive method of their choosing. And we work in deeply red states like Utah. We work in blue states. We work in purple states on the very narrow issue, which is very, very important, of securing contraceptive
Yeah.
choice. And we also, and there are a lot of sort of also kind of partnering objectives and contraceptives relating to, prescription, prescribing the pill by pharmacists, that kind of thing. So we are very, very active in contraceptives. And on the abortion issue, that's not something that we work on specifically at Arnold Ventures, but it's something that we work on personally. And
when
and
you
that is
do
important
something
to
like
us.
the contraceptive issue, do you ever stop and say, how is this going to be received or perceived? Or do you just think, this is what we believe, we have the ability to make a difference, and damn the consequences?
Well, the latter for sure. And I mean, and I don't think that it's not as cavalier as saying damn the consequences. It's in my view, we have chosen issues that are really not disputable. I mean, even if you are the most staunch opponent of abortion, you don't want an unwanted pregnancy. I don't want an unwanted pregnancy either, and I support abortion rights. So we are on the same page. So we should all want contraceptive access. That is why that's an issue for us, because it is non-ideological.
Right. We're going to go to questions in a moment or two, 3. We have microphones in the aisle. I'll encourage you to line up. We'll take as many as time permit. I want to talk about journalism for a couple of minutes, okay?
Yes.
Why is this a good investment? There are a lot of people on the front end.
Why is it a good investment, Evan?
Yeah.
Well,
no, I don't like how you asked that. Wait a minute.
I think it's an amazing, you know what, I will tell you,
Right.
Journalism for me and for Arnold Ventures is a key part of our democracy portfolio.
Yeah.
Because I do not believe that we can have a fulsome, active civil society or a democracy if we don't have an engaged citizenry. And you cannot have an engaged citizenry if you do not have watchdogs and if you don't have the fourth estate. So it is a critical pillar of everything that we're trying to do. None of our policy work will matter if we don't have an informed body of individuals who care about issues.
And so we're clear, the only goal you have in funding journalism is an informed electorate. It doesn't tie back to your policy goals. You're not funding, it's not like a vanity press where you're funding people for the purpose of publishing what you want them to publish.
Absolutely. Now, there are issue areas where we believe that transparency is particularly important in light of our own policy objectives, or in light of our own issue area interests. So we fund the Marshall Project, which has a focus on criminal justice. We fund Kaiser Health News, but we don't have any editorial control over what they fund. We believe that it's important for more investigative reporting and more reporting to occur in those areas, because we believe that there's a lack of transparency that will awaken the need for systemic reform.
Yeah. So you made a decision within the last year to commit a significant amount of money. I believe it's $5 million. It may be more, and ultimately will be more, one imagines, to create or to help create a nonprofit news organization in the city of Houston, your hometown. What's wrong? And you were able to get Houston Endowment to join you to the tune of, I believe, $7 million. Is that right?
That's right.
And then the Kinder family came in and matched what the endowment did. So you're up to 19. I know that the Knight Foundation, the American Journalism Project also put some money in. So you're starting out with $20 million out of the gate to create a new nonprofit news organization in a city that is the largest in Texas and a county that is not only the largest, but would be the 25th largest state in the country, right? Mm-hmm. What's wrong with the Houston Chronicle? Don't we have a paper in that community?
We do have a paper in that community, and you and your colleagues, not you personally, but many of your colleagues have been very vocal about the fact that the number of reporters in a place like the Chronicle has dwindled dramatically in the past 5 years, even, and certainly in the past 10 years. So the character of news reporting has changed. The business of news reporting has changed. The business of the newspaper has changed. So now nobody's doing the things that the Texas Tribune does in Austin. No one's doing that at the local level. So Harris County is an enormous county, and there are no reporters that are covering to the degree that we believe the city and the county deserves. There aren't reporters covering the county commission, city hall issues, the education boards. So the impetus behind this project is to engage the citizens, right, and to give people more visibility as to what's happening in the fourth largest city in the country. Because the Houston Chronicle, sadly, just due to a declining business model, isn't providing that.
Right. So answer the question that I believe from my interactions with you, of course, I know the answer to, but the average person uninitiated will want to know this. What I hear is rich people, the Arnolds and the Kinders, and a foundation that is interconnected with so much of the city of Houston and the establishment are funding a news organization. How can I trust, if three entities are putting $20 million in on the front end, that they're not going to ultimately control the content produced by that news organization? How is this not a case where funders determine the journalism?
It's a fair question. First of all, I suppose the short answer.
It goes in as a perception.
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think these questions need to be asked. I think that the political profile of the funders should give some comfort. Specifically the fact that we are centrist. The Kinders are certainly Republicans, and also centrist Republicans. They're not they're centrist as well, but they lean right. But I think more importantly, everybody is approaching this issue and this project with the same vantage point of transparency. Everybody wants to get the same thing out of it, and absolutely nobody who gives 1 cent has editorial control. We have a superstar chief editor who will do what he thinks is appropriate, and will allocate resources as he feels appropriate. So there is a very, very significant and serious firewall between the funders and the editorial board. Now, there is a board, and the board makes decisions in terms of strategy and management. But those are more financial decisions.
We all work for somebody.
Yeah.
We
But
have a board. I mean, that's how that goes, right?
That's right. That's right. Yeah. But I think I think the important thing is that the bedrock values of this organization and of the funders of this organization are to serve the community. Nobody in this movie has a set of political agenda that they're trying to promote. It's quite the contrary. In fact, I mean, probably we disagree on many things.
Got it.
So
we'll go front, back, and we'll take as many as time permit. We have about 20 minutes. We've got to stop at the time that we're supposed to be done. Yeah, hi.
Hi, thank you for being here. I love that you talked about long-term much earlier. What we're seeing that's been long-term is, polarization is up, media or news literacy is down, and even the solution, journalism education, is especially down, especially in our schools. I know in Houston, according to surveys, about over 85% of schools neither have a student newsroom nor any journalism course offerings. Yep. Right. I was told that by someone from your organization that journalism education isn't one of the primary focuses. I'm wondering, who do you think is going to be brave enough to engage in journalism education from a philanthropic standpoint? That's generally my question.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think we can all agree that part of any policy solution is to start at the level of education. Educate good journalists, educate people, and not just on journalism, but on the importance of civic engagement, right? Civics education. I think there are some philanthropists who fund that. The reason, just to specifically answer your question as to why we don't fund that at Arnold Ventures, is that our mission and our tactics are very much about laws, about changing laws, because we believe that our philanthropic dollars have the highest leverage, and impact if we are able to move the needle on government resources that are allocated to a specific question. So we usually shy away from funding kind of education programs. It's just not part of our theory of change. Not because it's not important, because we do deeply believe it's important. But you just have to allocate resources, limited resources, in the way that you feel will be most impactful for your narrow mission. But in terms of who would be interested, I do think that education and civic engagement is something that does interest a number of philanthropists. And anybody who's interested in democracy does have this interest in creating transparency. So I really appreciate your question. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Ma'am, we'll go back to you.
Me?
Hello.
Yes, please.
Margaret Spelling's your boss, Evan Smith. Hey, Laura.
Hello, Margaret.
I'm treating you like everybody else today.
First of all, thank you for everything you do, and I think we in Texas do not fully appreciate the incredible philanthropic class we have in this state, especially in Houston and Dallas, and that you all are pace setters with a unique, ability to be bold. My question for you is, how do you stay patient on these issues that are so thorny, and we're trying to turn the Queen Mary when it's often 3 steps forward and 2 steps back? And how can we collectively continue to build momentum in the philanthropic and the governmental community to do this long-term work?
Well, thank you, Margaret. And I should say, first of all, that talking about evidence-based policy, that was a pioneer right there of evidence-based policy when she was in the Bush administration. So I am so grateful that you really in many ways started this conversation about looking at the data. I think that it takes a lot of conviction, right? I mean, part of it to me is having the sincerity, approaching the work with the sincerity of saying, I don't know what the right answer is. I know that the current answer is not the right one. I do know that the system is not optimal right now. So at the very, very least, I know that something needs to change. So I think that having an honest discussion about what it takes to change systems and having frank conversations about whether or not things are working, and I think having the humility to understand that things are very hard to change. At least that's how I approach it. But I think you're right that we all have to have the collective conviction to believe that change is possible, and to believe that these problems are worth our attention, even if we can't solve them tomorrow. And I think that's a very hard thing to do day to day, but I think that's our mission.
But of course, not everybody has the luxury or the resources so to be patient, right?
That's right.
I mean, you're in a privileged group in that you do have the ability to say, if this takes longer than we intend,
That's right.
we can stick it out. Not everybody can do that.
That's right.
Yeah.
I think that's absolutely right. But that's what we as philanthropists can add to the discussion,
Right.
that long-term view.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you, boss.
Thank
Yeah.
you, Margaret.
Hi, I'm in Austin. I'm a member of a group called Advocates for Social Justice Reform. And I've always, watching TV and movies, I always, you get arrested or you get stopped by a police officer, you have the right to remain silent. If you can't afford an attorney, you will get one appointed.
If you get arrested.
Get arrested.
Yes.
So until I joined this group, I did not realize that a person did not get representation at the first appearance. And in Austin, it's called magistration. And because of the Arnold Foundation, you were willing to give a grant to Travis County so that, because Travis County does not provide an attorney when a person is arrested and before they go in front of the judge to set bond. And because of you, Travis County was going to do it. For 6 months, all these professionals everywhere, until the sheriff in Travis County decided she could not provide the support, which is heartbreaking because 75% of the people in jail have not been convicted of anything.
So let me ask you a question. Tell if you have a question, please.
I have a question of, can Travis County, if we can, my group and everybody go back and somehow get the sheriff, can we apply again?
This turns out
So-
to be a grant
so
meeting.
this
I
is
didn't know. That's,
I
admire you. That's good.
Sorry.
Or I hope, will you be supporting other communities, and hopefully we'll get to a point to where everyone gets represented. Whatever
Yes,
those
no,
question is.
tell me your name. Sorry, I didn't get your name.
Oh, my name is Laura Ann Gerson.
Laura. So, you are speaking much of our agenda. I think the issues you've identified are critical, and specifically the issue that the issue that we were talking about is the fact that although we live in a country where we're innocent until proven guilty, the way that the mechanics of pretrial justice works, you don't get a lawyer if you are indigent or if you can't afford one until much later in the process. And from a procedural perspective, from a pragmatic perspective, what that means is you stay in jail for a super long time only because you don't have money. And second, you are much more likely to plead to something that you didn't do just so you can get out and go back to your family, which means you have a criminal record, which means that, like this snowballs into catastrophic circumstances
Right.
for you, for your family, and for society. So you've pointed to an issue that is a core issue on our pretrial agenda. We are looking at this issue that is part of our pretrial justice principles, is getting people representation as early as possible, as soon as they get before a magistrate or get before a decision maker relating to their freedom. That is something that is near and dear to us, so I very much appreciate the work that you're doing, and know that, I don't know the specifics of your particular organization and our grant to you, but know that that's an issue that we're actively working on.
The grant was to Travis County. We're just a community group advocating for them to do it.
This is something that we are working on nationwide, and that is a pillar of our pretrial justice strategy, so thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good deal. Thank you very much. In the back, please.
Hello, my name is Cornell Woolridge, and I have been in the civic space for over 20 years. I currently work for an organization that works to build civic faith in communities all across the country. And it's my experience that at the root of so many issues that I know you're working on is a lack of trust and an actual faith in each other to come together and solve problems. And so what my question to you is, where do you see philanthropy in the area of helping to build civic faith, which is different than civic education and engagement? It is actually purposefully and intentionally bringing people of vast beliefs together in a community to understand what their civic faith is and to actually act on that?
Cornell, that's a really great question. And I think it's something, my short answer is Arnold Ventures is less well positioned to do that, if I'm being very honest with you, because that work is community based. That is the work that each of us as a citizen has to do because we care about our community. So I can do that work in my neighborhood, you do that work in your neighborhood, and we talk about how we get our neighborhoods together and have these conversations. I think that as a policy organization, it's very difficult to do that, but I agree with you that it is work that all of us as citizens, taking away our philanthropy hat or our, whatever our nonprofit hat or any other hat that we wear, just as individuals and as part of a country and a community and a state, that we have to do and that we have to be better at creating channels of discourse. That said, I do think that there are philanthropies that try to fund those efforts. But I think that those efforts will rise and fall based on community engagement and absolute local presence. That is not something that can be dictated by a national foundation or even by a state foundation. That's my own view.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for your question, ma'am.
Great. Thank you for your amazing philanthropy and support. So I'm curious, in the context of the discussion of public interest journalism, and just given the state of our democracy and paltry voter turnouts, especially in the primaries, what role do you see the importance of local journalism, local newsrooms, especially in towns and counties where their budgets have been decimated, staffs have been decimated? What role, what importance, how important do you view local newsrooms, and do you see Arnold Ventures moving in that area at any time?
Thank you for bringing that up. We do have, I would say, I don't know the number off the top of my head, but we have a significant amount of money invested in local news agencies and local and nonprofit newsrooms all over the country for exactly the reason that you noted. Because I think that, like, I consider myself a pretty informed citizen nationwide and even locally, and I can't tell you what was covered at the last county commission meeting in Harris County, and it's very important. I couldn't tell you the headlines of how the Katrina money was spent in the federal money that was given to Harris County. Those are important things. I should know those things, and if I, who care and who are looking to learn those things, don't have that at my fingertips, then I have to assume that many people don't. So it's very, to me, the role of local news and of local engagement is at least to give that transparency, not necessarily for an end goal. The end goal in and of itself is transparency, is so that people understand what's happening in their community, and then they can assert a view, whether or not this is something that they want to see happen, whether or not the money's spent in the same way. And I think journalists, talented journalists like the ones at the Texas Tribune can point some things out. Did you realize that certain allocations of money are this way as opposed to this way? And that is fodder for conversation. And that, to me, leads to civic engagement. And then you care, because at least you know. But if you don't know, then how are you expected to care? If you have a job and you've got kids and you've got a mortgage and you've got, you have so many day-to-day challenges. Yeah. Information should not be your challenge.
Thank you for your question. Laura, based on what you just said, I'm inclined to point out that the definition of local changes depending upon how you're thinking and talking about it and who you're talking to. I think about state legislatures as local. Mm-hmm. And if there's nothing that we've learned over the last year, is state legislatures have an impact in their decisions on everybody's lives. So you would expand, presumably, the definition of local in the way that you just talked about it to include everything from covering a state all the way down to covering a community.
I would, absolutely.
For the same reason, value in the information flow.
That's right.
Good, excellent. In the back, please.
Yeah, thank you so much. So my question is, do you think that technology should play a large part in addressing systemic social issues? And furthermore, to what extent is technological innovation a part of solving issues in our society in general? And to what extent is that a part of the calculation at Arnold Ventures?
I think technology is a reality, first of all. So whether or not it's part of a solution is, in a sense, it's part of what we need to deal with. At times it can be a tool It can be a tool to, to increase transparency. So, for example, we have some democracy investments that relate to digitizing all records of video debates in the California State Assembly, right? Just so that the journalists have the ability to search those and search their content for stories. There's a lot of ways that technology can accelerate the effort of transparency. In an area like education, many people are very interested in how technology can close the achievement gap. Results have been mixed. I think that technology, in large part, has proven to be helpful to those who are already interested and already arguably wouldn't need a leg up. It's been less challenging. It's been more challenging and less effective at addressing the core issues of education and equity in this country. But I think that a lot of people are working on it. So technology definitely, there's certainly a conversation and aspirations of using technology to close the achievement gap in education. I think in many areas, in every area of work, it is a reality. I think that in terms of, you asked how it works for Arnold Ventures and how we think about it, I think we certainly think about it as a tool. We are not best positioned to develop technology interventions, so that's not something that we actively do. But certainly it's something that we keep in mind both as a tool and also as as something that could complicate efforts if misused.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good question, sir.
With things like our high rates of carbon emissions and traffic crashes and unaffordability, I'd propose the Texas transportation and urban planning systems are broken systems, heavily influenced by a lot of government perversion of marketplace. And so with another 20 million Texans coming, if we could improve those systems, we could change the nation. And so I wonder if you think those broken systems are ones that Arnold Ventures would get interested in.
I love the fact that you are introducing our line of work in infrastructure, which is one of our next large areas of exploration in Arnold Ventures. I absolutely agree with you, not just in Texas, but in general. I think that there's a lot to explore in terms of efficiency, infrastructure investments, housing, the next generation, and really not just next generation, this generation, problems that in areas of improvement where the intersection of innovation and policy needs to be explored so that the policy landscape becomes more favorable for innovation and also becomes a catalyst for smart design of solutions that we'll need given population growth and given mobility, et cetera. So thank you for flagging that.
So that's the next bucket of things?
That's one of the next bucket of things, yes.
So you're already planning. That's not just a thought in your head. You're planning to commit resources to that.
We are.
Okay, very well. That's vaguely news-ish.
Thanks.
Isn't it?
Vaguely.
Right, vaguely news-ish. I think we're going to have time, I'm afraid, for just one more. I'm really sorry. But we may be able to get two more if we have fast question, fast answer. Go ahead.
Fast answer. I'll do a fast answer. Make it easy.
Sam Gessling, Chief Growth Officer, Center for First Generation Student Success. What are your thoughts on greater accountability for universities and colleges around graduation rates or first-gen college graduates? And thank you for everything you've done for students in Texas.
I love this question. This is a large part of our higher education work. We have a very dedicated team of policy experts that work on exactly this issue, the issue being transparency. And we are very active in trying to introduce the College Transparency Act and trying to introduce these elements of information so that people can make informed choices as to what the graduation rates are, what the income rates are, what the success rates are of students of certain profiles who graduate from certain schools. That's very, very important work to us, and we think that's a core piece of accountability. And that's a large part of what Margaret did when she was in a position of authority. So again, a shout out to Margaret Spellings. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, no verbs.
No verbs. Oh my gosh.
Question good.
Yeah, thanks for taking my question. I noticed that you and I share an alma mater in Yale Law School. I'm curious about, as you think about systems change and legal reform, the role of the Supreme Court in affecting, and state courts in affecting the various policy areas that you're invested in.
we've seen that the Supreme Court has had an enormous impact on areas that affect us all. There are some Supreme Court cases that are being considered that could significantly alter our strategy. I'm thinking specifically of the case in the next session dealing with the independent state legislature doctrine, and there are others. I mean, certainly some civil rights cases. I mean, the short answer is, of course, the rulings of courts, specifically the Supreme Court, but also state courts. They're common law. They're law, and they do affect how we view our policy windows. And it's something that we have to keep in mind. And if certain judgments are not favorable to our strategy, will absolutely make us pivot. But you're right to point out that the judicial branch is critical. The third branch of government is critical for good and for bad. So it is something that we look out for. So thank you so much.
Laura, thank you. This was great. I
Thank you,
appreciate your
everybody.
willingness to engage. Laura Arnold.
Thank you.
Everybody, thank you for coming. We'll see you over the next day and a half. Enjoy the festival.